What is written in each of these 7 books should be impossible. Each contains something their own cultures could not have produced. Books that should not exist. Books that should not say what they say. And books whose pages have resisted every scholar, every cryptanalyst, and every carbon dating machine pointed at them. They predict eclipses no one of their era should have seen coming. They carry the longest surviving text of a language no living person can read. They contain the oldest written 0 on Earth, and much more. The first manuscript sits inside a climate-controlled chamber at the Saxon State Library in Dresden, catalog number Meskjar Dresd R310. It is called the Dresden Codex, and it is one of only 4 surviving pre-Columbian Maya books on Earth. The rest were burned. In July 1562, in the town of Mani on the Yucatán Peninsula, the Spanish bishop Diego de Landa gathered every Maya codex his clergy could locate, piled them in the square, and lit them on fire. He wrote afterward that the books contained lies of the devil. What he burned was, by modern estimate, the bulk of the written literature of a civilization. 4 escaped. The Dresden is the densest of those 4. It is painted on bark paper, folded accordion style into a single strip 3.5 meters long, and contains 78 pages of red, black, and blue glyphs. And on pages 24 and 46 through 50, it does something no European manuscript of the same century manages. It tracks the planet Venus across 104 years. The Maya scribes gave the synodic period of Venus as 584 days. The real average is 583.92 days. They were off by less than 2 hours per Venus cycle, and they wrote in a correction mechanism, a pre-Columbian leap cycle adjustment that keeps the table aligned across generations. This is a culture without telescopes, without lens glass, without mechanical clocks, working only with naked eye observation from stone platforms like El Caracol at Chichen Itza. They produced a table that modern astronomers still cross-check against their own instruments. And the eclipse table runs for 33 years, solar and lunar both, with dates that match modern reconstructions. The German librarian Ernst Forstemann, working in the Dresden Reading Room in the 1880s, was the first Westerner to crack the arithmetic. He did it decades before anyone else could read the rest of Maya script. Then came February 1945. Allied firebombs hit the Saxon State Library. The Codex survived, but water-stained, and some of the folds are now displaced. A book that survived Diego de Landa, survived the Atlantic crossing, survived 3.5 centuries in European libraries, and survived the firestorm that erased a city. It still predicts eclipses. Skeptics will say the Venus table is partly numerological. That is true. The Maya wove sacred counts into their tables, ritual intervals that served religious calendars more than astronomical prediction. But numerology rides on top of the observation. It does not replace it. Somebody watched the sky for generations and wrote down what it did. The 583.92 day figure is not a guess. It is not a coincidence. It is the result of multiple human lifetimes spent tracking a single planet across a specific horizon and correcting errors across cycles no single scribe would live to see close. The Dresden Codex is not a magic book. It is a lab notebook from a laboratory that had no instruments. The second manuscript is not in Italy. It is the longest surviving text in the Etruscan language, and it sits in the Archaeological Museum in Zagreb, Croatia, under refrigerated glass. It is called the Liber Linteus Zagrebiensis, the Linen Book of Zagreb, and it was not found in a library. It was found wrapped around a corpse. In 1848, a Croatian official named Mahajlo Beric bought a mummy in Alexandria as a souvenir. The linen bandages wrapping the body were covered in faint red and black lettering. Beric assumed it was Egyptian Demotic or maybe Coptic. Nobody looked closer for 44 years. Then, in 1892, the Austrian Egyptologist Jacob Kroll examined the script and realized what he was looking at. The woman in the case was named Nessie Hensu, wife of a Theban tailor, dead in the 1st century BC, but the strips wrapped around her body were 3rd century BC, and they were not Egyptian at all. They were Etruscan, an entire Etruscan linen book cut into bandages and repurposed by a Ptolemaic embalmer who had no idea what the text said. 12 columns, right to left. roughly 1,330 words of a language that died around the 1st century AD, and whose grammar is only partially reconstructed even now. The classical Roman authors mention the Libri Linteus, the linen books of the Etruscans, repeatedly. Not a single one survives in Italy. The only one on earth is this one, shredded into bandage cloth, carried by a dead Egyptian woman across the Mediterranean, and sold by a dealer in Alexandria to a Croatian tourist. The text appears to be a religious calendar, named gods, named rituals, fixed dates, but partially read is not read. Every third word is still a guess. Every other sentence is still an argument in a peer-reviewed journal. Consider what this means. The Romans absorbed the Etruscans. The Etruscan language died under Roman pressure around the 1st century AD. Classical authors from Livy to the Emperor Claudius studied it. Claudius himself wrote a 20-volume Etruscan history. Every one of those volumes is lost. Every Italian Etruscan linen book is lost. The single largest surviving corpus of the language on the entire planet is a calendar that survived only because a Ptolemaic Egyptian embalmer ran out of bandage cloth and bought imported linen he could not read. The longest text in a lost European language is a calendar we cannot open, and it survived by accident. The third manuscript is 70 fragile folios of birch bark, and it contains what may be the oldest written 0 on Earth. In 1881, a farmer was digging in a field near the village of Bakhshali, then in the Peshawar district of British India, now in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan. He hit something. What he pulled from the soil was a mathematical treatise written in an early form of Sharada script in a hybrid language scholars call Gatha, a fusion of Sanskrit and Prakrit. Since 1902, it has been held at the Bodleian Library at Oxford. On one of its folios, inside a multi-digit number, there is a small, solid T. That dot is the seed of every digital device now in existence. In 2017, Oxford ran radiocarbon tests on 3 folios. The results came back spread across centuries. One folio dated to 224 CE to 383 CE, another to 680 to 779, a third to 885 to 993. The manuscript as bound today was assembled from 3 different centuries worth of birch bark. If the earliest date holds, someone was already writing 0 as a placeholder in the 3rd century after Christ, roughly 500 years before scholars believed the symbol existed. Oxford revised the earliest dating in October 2024 to between 799 and 1102 after an international team challenged the original test. But even the revised dating makes the Bakhshali 0 one of the oldest on Earth, rivaling the Gwalior temple inscription of the 9th century. The text also contains algebraic problems in verse, a working method equivalent to the modern algorithm for solving quadratic equations, fractions, square roots, and profit and loss problems. The conceptual leap from dot as placeholder to 0 as a number in its own right came later, with the Indian mathematician Brahmagupta in 628 CE, but the placeholder is the hinge. Before it, every number system on Earth collapsed when it tried to express emptiness. Roman numerals had no 0. Greek numerals had no 0. Egyptian hieroglyphic counting had no 0. Babylonian sexagesimal arithmetic had a placeholder gap, but never committed it to a symbol. The Bakhshali is the placeholder, the hinge. The moment a scribe somewhere in the old Gandhara region put a dot where nothing was and changed arithmetic forever. Every transistor on Earth inherits from that dot, every binary flag, every floating point register, every IP address. The whole digital world runs on a concept that someone in a field in what is now Pakistan pressed into birch bark with dark ink, and we still cannot agree within 500 years on when he did it. The 4th manuscript weighs 74.8 kilograms, which is 165 pounds. It is 92 centimeters tall, 50 centimeters wide, and 22 centimeters thick. It is called the Codex Gigas, the giant book, and it is the largest extant medieval manuscript on Earth. It sits today at the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. It was not made in Sweden. It was written in the Benedictine monastery of Podlazic in Bohemia between roughly 1204 and 1230 CE. 310 vellum leaves, about 160 animal skins. Forensic handwriting analysis confirms the entire main text, every line, every letter, every column, was written by a single scribe in a uniform, unwavering hand. This is where it stops being ordinary. Medieval scribes wrote for a few hours a day on smaller books, and their handwriting ages visibly across the years. The Codex Gigas shows no aging. Its script is uniform. The lettering on folio 300 looks identical to the lettering on folio 1. By conservative modern estimate, one monk working alone would have needed 20 to 30 years of continuous labor to produce this book. The legend that the monks of Podlazice preserved and that medieval Bohemian chroniclers repeated is that he finished it in a single night with help from the devil. Midway through the volume, filling one entire page, is a full-page portrait of Satan himself, crouched with a forked tongue, painted in pigments noticeably duller than the rest of the book. Opposite him on the facing page is an image of the heavenly city at equal scale. No other medieval manuscript contains an image of the devil at this size or with this treatment. Between 8 and 10 pages have been deliberately cut out of the book at some point in its history. The stubs are still visible inside the spine. Nobody knows what they contained. In July 1648, as the 30 Years' War ended, Swedish soldiers looted Prague Castle, Olki, rolled the Codex Gigas into a cart, and hauled it back to Stockholm. It has not returned to Czech soil since. The book contains the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, the Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, the Etymologiae of Isidore of Seville, a medical text, a Bohemian chronicle, and a list of exorcism rites, an encyclopedia in one volume, written in one hand, finished, the monks insisted, in one night. The fifth manuscript was lost for nearly 400 years. It is called the Book of Soyga, and it belonged to Dr. John Dee, the astrologer, mathematician, cryptographer, and spy master to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee owned the largest private library in Elizabethan England. When he died in 1609, the book went missing. Scholars spent centuries assuming it was destroyed. Then, in 1994, an American historian named Deborah Harkness, working on her doctoral dissertation at the British Library, found a manuscript titled Alderaya Sive Soyga Vocor, catalogued as Sloane Manuscript 8. A second copy turned up at the Bodleian as Bodley Manuscript 908. Both had been sitting in plain sight, mislabeled for 4 centuries. The book is a Latin occult treatise in 2 parts. The second part is what matters. It consists of 36 tables, each a 36 by 36 grid of Latin letters. There are 46,656 cells, seemingly random. In the year 1582, John Dee was convinced the tables held a divine secret. He arranged a scrying session at his house in Mortlake with the medium Edward Kelly. Kelly stared into an obsidian mirror and, according to Dee's own diary, summoned the archangel Uriel. Dee asked one question: what do the tables mean? The answer, recorded in Dee's hand in the document preserved as the true and faithful relation, was that the Book of Soyga had been given to Adam when he entered paradise, and that only the archangel Michael could interpret its tables. Dee died without an interpretation. Then the book vanished. Then it came back. In 1998, the American mathematician Jim Reeds reverse-engineered the generating rule. Every cell and every grid, all 46,656 of them, is produced from a single seed word by a fixed arithmetic algorithm. The grids are not random. The mathematics is solved. What the output means, what the generated letter sequences were supposed to say or invoke or conceal, remains unsolved. Someone in the 1500s built a working algorithm, hid it inside tables of Latin letters, and claimed the result came from an angel. The book carried a reputation in occult circles that reading it killed the reader within 2.5 years. That is legend, not fact. What is fact is that somebody designed those grids with mathematical precision and then walked away without explaining why. The sixth manuscript has resisted every attempt at decipherment for more than 180 years. It is called the Rohonc Codex. It has been held since 1838 at the library of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest, donated by Count Gustav Batthyány along with his family library. 448 paper pages, 12 by 10 centimeters each, with between 9 and 14 rows of symbols per page. Watermark analysis on the paper stock points to a Venetian mill operating between 1529 and 1540, though that only dates the paper, not the writing. The script uses roughly 200 distinct characters, 10 times the alphabet of any natural language, which means it is either a syllabary or a cipher. In either way, it is a nightmare to crack. Linguist after linguist has thrown proposed source languages at it. Examples include Hungarian, Dacian, early Romanian, Cuman, ancient Hindi, and Old Hungarian Runic. None stick under peer review. In 2015, Hamburg University rescanned the codex at high resolution, but only 8 pages were released to the public. The rest remain under restricted access. Independent amateur decipherments exist. Attila Neri announced in 1996 that it was an ancient Hungarian prayer. Marius Alexandru Daianu announced in 2010 that it was a vulgar Latin prayer book in Dacian script. Neither survived scholarly scrutiny. In 2018, the Hungarian cryptologist Levente Zoltan Kirali and historian Gabor Tokaj published a partial reading suggesting a New Testament paraphrase, but no other team has independently reproduced their method, and the book is illustrated. 87 miniatures, crucifixion scenes appear alongside crescent moons, Christian crosses share pages with sun-wheel iconography. No confessional tradition in 16th century Europe mixes these symbols the way the Rohonc mixes them. The mainstream verdict is forger, an 18th century Hungarian nationalist hoax. The counter-argument is simple. Hoaxes decode once you guess the target language. The Rohonc has resisted every language anyone has proposed for 180 years. A hoaxer smart enough to defeat that many linguists is itself a kind of impossibility. The 7th manuscript may hide the largest undiscovered treasure in American history. It is called the Beale Papers. In 1819 and 1821, a man named Thomas Beale is said to have buried 2 caches of gold, silver, and jewels somewhere in Bedford County, Virginia, within 4 miles of a place called Buford's Tavern. In 1822, he delivered a sealed iron box to a Lynchburg innkeeper named Robert Morris and vanished. The box was opened decades later. Inside were 3 sheets of numbers. In 1885, a Virginian named J.B. Ward published the whole story in a 23-page pamphlet titled The Beale Papers. The originals are lost. The printed pamphlet is what remains. 3 ciphers. Cipher number 1 is 520 numbers long and describes the location of the vault. Cipher number 2 is 763 numbers long and describes the contents. Cipher number 3 is 618 numbers long and lists the 30 men in Beale's party and their next of kin. Cipher 2 has been cracked. The key is the United States Declaration of Independence. Each number indexes a word in the document, and the first letter of that word is the plain text letter. Run through Cipher 2, and it reads as an inventory. 2,921 pounds of gold, 5,100 pounds of silver, $13,000 in jewels, at January 2025 gold prices. The metal alone is worth over $60 million. Cipher 1 and Cipher 3 remain unbroken. Every United States foundational document has been tried. The King James Bible in multiple editions, the Shakespeare Folio, every period almanac, every newspaper of record from the 1820s. Nothing works. The National Security Agency has looked at it. Professional cryptographers have looked at it. Thousands of amateurs have looked at it. The linguist Joe Nickel and the cryptographer Jim Galogli both published statistical analyses in the 1980s and the 1990s arguing that the letter frequencies in the unsolved ciphers deviate from the patterns you would expect if they encoded real English plaintext. Their conclusion was that the whole thing is an 1885 hoax by J.B. Ward. That is the mainstream verdict. Here is the counterweight. Even if Ward invented the entire story, he constructed 2 cipher grids that 140 years of professional cryptanalysis, including the resources of the United States government, have failed to break. Either the treasure is real and sits buried in Virginia soil right now, or the hoax is the most unbreakable amateur cipher in American history. Both are extraordinary. Bedford County still reports unauthorized digs. Metal detectors have been confiscated on protected land. Shovels in the woods at night. 140 years after the pamphlet was printed, people are still digging. 7 manuscripts, 7 survivors. The Maya book that watched Venus for a century and got it right within 2 hours. The Etruscan book, shredded into grave bandages and carried west by a dead woman. The birch bark book that wrote down 0 before Europe knew what 0 was. The monk's book finished, according to legend, in a single supernatural night. The angelic book with 46,000 letters, generated by an algorithm no one understood for 400 years. The Hungarian book that has defeated 180 years of decipherment. The Virginia cipher that locks a $60 million hoard behind numbers the NSA cannot read. Each one sits on a real shelf in a real library with a real catalog number. Dresden Manuscript, Dresd R310, Zagreb Archaeological Museum, Bodleian, Oxford, National Library of Sweden, British Library, Sloane Manuscript, 8, and Bodley Manuscript, 908. Hungarian Academy of Sciences, Budapest, Library of Congress, 1885 printing. You can walk into most of these buildings and see the books through glass. You can stand in the Dresden reading room and look at the Venus tables. You can stand in Stockholm and look at the devil. You can stand at the Bodleian and look at the dot that became every digital system on Earth. And still, after all of that looking, the manuscripts do not give up their secrets. The eclipse tables are read, but the method of observation is not fully understood. The Etruscan calendar is partially decoded, but the meaning of half the words is still an argument. The Bakhshali zero is confirmed, but its date is contested by 500 years. The Codex Gigas scribe is identified as one hand, but the legend of a single night has outlived every rationalist explanation. The Soyga grids are solved arithmetically, but unsolved semantically. The Rohonc is unread. The Beale is half read, half locked, and the locked half points to buried gold. 7 books that defy all explanation. They are not lost, they are not mythical. They are catalogued, photographed, glassed, and guarded. And every one of them contains something its own century should not have been able to produce. The scholars keep working, the cryptographers keep trying, the farmers in Virginia keep digging, and the books keep their silence.